Hey guys, it's Kevin to get my review for the highly anticipated film that everyone was just so hyped for, of course being the latest sequel from Disney Channel, of course being Zombies 2. And what Zombies 2 is essentially about is basically we center still on the characters of Zed and Addison. They are at a point where, you know, they feel a lot more at peace and things like that. They have a very strong romance. However, that is threatened by the arrival of these werewolves who need to obtain this new object, but they also need Addison's help in order to do that. But they also have a long history of clashing with the zombies and things like that. And so basically they threaten to shake the newfound peace that is gone at Seabrook High, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Zombies 2, as you can imagine, I really was not that excited for the sequel. I didn't really see a point in them furthering the story really at all. I just kind of figured they would because every Disney Channel film now, it seems, they can't just be standalones. They gotta always have a sequel. They gotta always further the story. And now that the Descendants movies were over, this was clearly they were trying to make this their next big, like, musical franchise, even though it shouldn't be a musical, but it's all good. They did it anyway, and so now we have Zombies 2, and I really went into this movie not really knowing very much at all. I knew there were going to be werewolves. I knew that there was probably going to be something really stupid, but other than that, I didn't really know that much, but of course, as usual, I figured that I would review it for you guys because I reviewed every other Disney Channel film that there is, so I watched it, and wow, Zombies 2 is somehow even worse than the first one. The first one, I think, was bad in the sense that it was really badly done, but it wasn't as bad as some of the other Disney Channel films. This is almost on par with a lot of what we've been getting lately. It's an extremely lazy and highly derivative sequel, which I'm going to get into, but there's just a lot that really does bring this one down. We're just going to start off, of course, with the cast. And if you guys remember, the acting in the first one I thought was almost universally terrible, and that's the same case here. I really don't think most of the acting is very good here. I will say, though, most of the things that were highlights in the first movie are almost all still highlights here, especially when it comes to Meg Donelly, who I still very much do think is the saving grace of this entire franchise. Her character of Addison, despite how I feel about her character, which we'll get into in a little bit, I do still think Donelly does do a really good job. She definitely does seem like she's still into it. She definitely does a good job of showing, you know, who Addison is and things like that. She's very likable as a main character of this film, because this really is much more about her, whereas the first one was more about Zed. This one's definitely more about Addison, and I thought overall she definitely did do a really good job here. There are definitely a couple moments where she was a bit iffy for me, but I do still think she overall did a solid job. Unfortunately, Milo Manheim, though, is still just not very good in this role at all. In fact, I think he's even worse here as Zed. Zed in this movie, we'll get to his character in a little bit, but let's just say I really didn't like him very much in the first one. I found him to be just very wooden and not really seeming like he gives a shit. Here, I think it's the opposite problem. Here, it feels like he's trying too hard, like he's overacting, and it just didn't really work here for me at all. He still says every line like he has, like, the worst, like, cold of his life or whatever. It's just, it's really, really bad, and I'm sorry to say, but even though it was a highlight in the first movie, the chemistry between Milo Manheim and Meg Donelly is not really there in this film. It feels far more manufactured here. It feels far more forced, and I just did not buy their romance in this film, and at least in the first one, I was still able to buy into it, you know, despite how forced and shitty it was. At least there, I was able to buy into it. Here, it just did not work for me, and I did not think they did an especially good job with that. As far as the rest of the performances go, you know, everyone else is pretty bad here. Trevor Tordjman still is the most enjoyably bad performance of this entire franchise. Still, he's really bad as the character of Bucky, but he's so bad that I just can't help but laugh at him. He's so ridiculously over the top in this film, still taking, not cheerleading in this film, he still does take that seriously, but also running for student body president. He takes this very seriously too, and he's just so ignorant in this film that it's almost hilarious to watch. Like, you get the sense that, because the joke is that, you know, he's so, like, he's so, like, discriminatory towards all these other, like, you know, races and things like that, like, you know, whether it be zombies, whether it be werewolves, what have you, but yet he also is very flashy in that way, and I think Tordjman, again, really bad in the role, but there's just something so ironically funny about it, and I still can't put my finger on what makes it funny, but every time he's on screen, I'm laughing, so I guess that's still a positive for me. In terms of everyone else, though, not very good. Once again, I really feel like this film wastes, Kylee Russell in this movie. I just, again, here, there's not really much for her to do very much at all as a character of Eliza. Same goes for Carla, same goes for James Godfrey, Carla Jeffrey, just really not much of anything they're going to do. And then the three new characters we have here, Pearce Joza is really, really bad as the character of Wyatt. Every single line he says, he has this very, like, nasally tone throughout him, and it's just, it is not at all convincing. He doesn't come across as the least bit threatening in this film, and it just does not work. I didn't think that Chandler Kinney was very strong either as a character of Willa, but maybe the worst of the three for me was Ariel Martin, who's also known as Baby Ariel. I know she's like this social media like personality, but to me this seemed like one of those performances where they cared less about talent and more just about brand recognition, and it really does show here. Her character is essentially trying to be someone that is seemingly very tough, but is really just a big softie and isn't nearly as tough as she seems, and it is not convincing whatsoever. It's extremely cringy to watch. It's basically her entire character in this movie, and I just could not stand her here. I thought she was really bad in this film, as is almost everyone, and again, you have this cast here that is almost just completely wasted. There's not much of anything for them to do, and considering that this is the sequel, and I really felt that in the first one they were very much underused. I thought in this second one they'd get to step up to the plate a bit more, but still, it really does show just how weak a lot of this cast is overall. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, which I have to say, I think that might be the biggest problem of this entire film. The directing here, you can tell, you know, from the first few minutes of this movie, this film does have a different director, and you can tell pretty much from the first few minutes that, yeah, this is not the same person that did the first film, because Paul Hoen, even though he's done a slew of Disney Channel films, some of which I actually really do like he did Camp Rock 2 and things like that, which I do very much enjoy. Here, it just is not working at all. It did not seem like he understood what the tone of the series was supposed to be, and I will say, the first film I thought was pretty tonally inconsistent. Like, it didn't really know what it wanted to be, if it was trying to be more of a comedy or if it was trying to be more of a social commentary on things, but the directing here just comes across as so messy. It just seems like they got him because he has a history of doing Disney Channel films, but had zero vision of his own, and it really does show here. The comedy especially is really bad in this film, and I don't remember it being particularly good in the first one either, but here especially, I don't think I laughed once, aside from when Bucky was on screen. I don't think I laughed once in this movie. I thought the comedy fell so incredibly flat, and I was just not into it at all, and then the more dramatic stuff that they do here is so incredibly forced that at times it feels like a soap opera. It really does. It's so just overly done, and I really do attribute it to the fact that I think this probably would have been a better sequel. Still probably would have been bad, but it would have been slightly more tolerable if we would have just gotten the same director back. I don't understand why they couldn't have done that. I mean, Kenny Ortega was still the director of all the Descendants films, same with the High School Musical franchise, and yet here they have a completely different director, and it really does show, and I think that really is the main thing that does bring a lot of this down. But the screenplay, absolutely. I mean, even if the directing wasn't good, the screenplay here would still be absolute shit, because it really does not do this any favors whatsoever. Really, I mean, Look, going into it, I was not expecting much from the writing because, again, just Disney Channel films, I've really just become very overly negative and desensitized towards. I'm not expecting much of anything from them. But the writing here is so utterly messy, and it feels like it had no idea what exactly it wanted to be, that it almost feels like this sequel had no vision whatsoever. Like, this was just a sequel that was made because the first one was such a big hit in that way, and so they just felt like they had to make a sequel, and it really feels like they had no idea what they wanted this to be. I mean, probably my biggest problem with this entire movie, well, there's two things really, but I'd say the biggest issue, one of them is how similar this is to other films, specifically Descendants 2. And even though I don't like that movie, I really do hate that one quite a bit. This film almost blatantly copies off of that movie. You have this group of outsiders known as these werewolves that come in, and they feel wronged by the zombies, and they take one of them under their wing and things like that, and, you know, they get her to change her look and all this kind of stuff, and it's almost exactly, you know, eventually they learn to, like, blend in, and it's almost exactly the same as Descendants 2, and I think that really does bring this down because it's not doing anything that different. It's not trying to be anything that different, but the even bigger problem with this movie is that it is almost exactly the same plot as the first movie. There really is no progression in terms of plot, in terms of character. There's nothing there. It almost feels like the first movie was completely pointless because remember how the message in the first movie was all about inclusivity. It was trying to do this very, you know, forceful message about that and about, about race and about discrimination. Like, it's very clear that's what it was about. Well, you get to this movie, and it almost feels like nothing has changed. The school is still very much against the zombies. They still very much want nothing to do with them. The character of Bucky especially hasn't changed, and even with Addison and Zed, their characters don't really feel all that different either. Addison is still in a place where she feels like she needs to conform. She needs to be part of this other group. She doesn't want to be herself. And it's like, did you learn anything in the first movie? Did you learn anything that went down? It feels like none of these characters really learn much of anything. And again, as much as I despise the Descendants sequels, at least there was some form of progression there. At least it felt like some of these characters had changed a little bit. There's almost no change with any of these characters, and that was something that really did bring this down for me, because it's like, what even is the point of the sequel if you're just going to basically regurgitate the same message as the first movie? It really felt like they had nothing new to say here. I mean, you could honestly replace the werewolves with just the zombies in the first movie. There really is no difference there, and it's very disappointing for sure. And again, even someone that wasn't looking forward to this film, I can't imagine how disappointed people were that were excited for this, that wanted to see something new, and the fact that they didn't is very disappointing here. But also, those characters in the movie, even the ones that we like in the first film, I don't think this film treats them all that well. I already talked about how Addison basically goes through the same exact arc in this movie. You know, the fact that she has this, she's embracing her new hair, but she also feels like there's a possibility that she could possibly be a werewolf. They kind of entertain that idea very early on, and so she's, like, blending in with them. She goes as far as to, like, change her look and everything, and it looks really awful. And so yeah, it's basically the same thing. Like, she learns to just be herself, and it's not even really a spoiler because you can tell that's where they're gonna go from the second this movie starts. They're gonna do the same exact thing. When it comes to the character of Zed, though, I do not think this movie knew what to do with him, because if they're trying to get me to buy into their romance, they do a really awful job at it. Throughout almost this entire movie, these two are incredibly toxic to one another, especially when it comes to Zed. I mean, the second that he realizes that Addison is bonding with the werewolves, he's getting in her way, he's trying to, like, thwart their plans at every second that he possibly can, and he's really really only doing what's convenient for him. He's so worried that, like, she's going to, you know, side with the werewolves and not the zombies. However, this doesn't make sense because literally a couple scenes later, he's trying to ally with the zombies. It seems like he's trying to work with them. So it really seems like the movie has no idea what to do with his character except to just be a complete asshole. And by the end of this movie, I kind of was like, I don't really want these two together. I don't think this is a very healthy relationship really at all, and I feel like this is a really bad message that Disney is promoting. They essentially kind of go with this idea that, like, you know, boyfriend should be, like, dictating everything that you do and say, and yeah, Zed does apologize, but it just is a really bad arc for this character, and again, especially considering that he was the protagonist of the first film, this film doesn't seem to respect him very much at all, and that was really hard to watch at points. I mean, just the way that he would call her out, but again, also the way he'd be a complete hypocrite because he himself is trying to bond with the werewolves, just doesn't work very much at all. And even he feels like a muted character at this point, even with all that assholery. His other big arc of this movie is that he wants to run against Bucky for, you know, student body president. However, he doesn't do it because, you know, he wants to, you know, have the zombies have more freedom. Like, no, all the posters that he has are him in his human form. Remember in the first movie where, you know, he was able to transform into a human for a little bit? That's all the posters that he has. So again, he hasn't even seemed to learn anything from the first movie, and it just really made me scratch my head and wonder, like, what is the point of the sequel? What are they really trying to do here? And I think that is another huge problem here, is that it just feels like they had no idea what to do with these characters beyond them just learning the same things here, making the sequel feel all the more pointless. But if you haven't guessed yet, this film really has no idea what to do with these werewolves whatsoever. They have a huge issue throughout the movie where they can't seem to figure out if these werewolves are supposed to be the villains of the movie or if they're supposed to be allies. And the thing is, they flip-flop constantly. It's not like in the beginning they're villains and then suddenly they're allies. Like, no, they quite literally are going back and forth throughout the whole movie. The first scene you see them, they're villains, and then the zombies are against them, and you think that, oh my god, the werewolves are trying to, you know, ruin what this, you know, the good work that the zombies had done in the first movie. But then all of a sudden they are allying with them, and then all of a sudden they're against them, and then they're trying to find this object, and then they're really only nice to Addison, and then they want to work with the zombies. It's just like, what the hell are you trying to do with these characters? I really could not tell what they were trying to do with them. It doesn't help that aside from those very small things I told you about these characters, there's really not much of anything to them. I really can't tell you too much about any of these guys aside from the character of Winter, who, like I said, has that really dumb sort of running gag where, like, she's trying to be tough and she's actually not. Aside from that, I don't know anything about the character of Willa. I don't know anything about the character of Wyatt. There's nothing for either of them to do. It's almost as if these werewolves weren't even supposed to be in this movie. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. I would not be surprised if originally this was just supposed to be like another group altogether, because it really doesn't feel like they have any identity of their own, and it just causes this problem with a lot of sequels where they introduce new characters where they don't really feel like characters. They feel very much like plot devices. They're just here to further the story, but it also is an issue because the film has no idea what to really do with them, and that really did bring this down for me. And also, the other thing I really hate about these werewolves is that it gives them yet another opportunity to really double down on this ridiculous social commentary. And again, I've said it before, social commentary is very important in forms of media, but Disney Channel films, I just do not think are the proper avenue. And again, I continue to maintain that philosophy very much here. I still very much think that that is a problem because it's so much in the background of this movie. It doesn't ever feel like it's at the forefront of what's going on. The perfect example of this is this scene in which the werewolves are like protesting, and there is quite literally tear gas that is being thrown at them. It's like, this is a Disney Channel movie. Kids are not going to be able to understand this. This is not something that kids need to be, you don't need to be exposing kids to this like in Disney Channel films. I don't really understand that, and it's very hard to take seriously as well because they don't really handle it all that well. And while the first film was very much, I think, about racism, this film is trying to be more about gentrification and things like that. The police brutality message is there as well in that one scene I just mentioned, but it very much is about gentrification, how you have this group that feels like they are being oppressed, that feels like people are trying to copy their style, and they're pissed about that, and it's just so tired. It's so tired, and this film just does not handle it at all, and especially considering that they really have no idea what to do with these werewolves. I just do not think this is a very good screenplay. There's also so many moments where things happen, but it feels like they're happening way too quickly. I already talked about the many spats that Zed and Addison have, but there's one especially that feels like it should be happening like the halfway point in the movie. It's not even like an hour in. It's like 30 minutes into the movie, these two are already having like this big climactic fight, and it just is not in any way convincing. There's another one that happens in the third act, and it feels like it's the same exact argument all 3 times in this movie, and it's mainly just because the film is just constantly skipping through story, and there's so many things that happen that are just so baffling because of that. And it also doesn't help that, like I said, the film, apart from Zed and Addison, have no idea what to do with any of these characters. Eliza is just the voice of reason that nobody takes seriously. You know, Bonzo is just, well, he's Bonzo, but apparently has some romance going on with Addison's best friend, which is really not touched upon at all. It's very much just something we see like 2 scenes of, and they don't do anything with it. And again, it's just a huge issue for me throughout this entire series. It's an ongoing issue that it does not seem like they're going to fix. So I don't know why I'm harping on it all that much, but it's really bad for sure. The cinematography here, once again, I will give this movie this. So again, it just results in an extremely messy screenplay overall that might just be the messiest of any of these Disney Channel sequels. Even Descendants 3, as bad as that film was, as anticlimactic as it was, as underwritten as it was, it didn't feel as messy as this film really does. At least that film felt like it had a plot, and I do think that film is worse than Zombies 2 overall, but if I had to pick like which one was messier, definitely Zombies 2, because it really does not seem like it has any idea what it wants to be. Now, when it comes to the cinematography, though, that's always a low point for Disney Channel films, and I will give this movie this. I admire that they at least tried to make this film look a little bit more cinematic. The aspect ratio has changed to a more, like, traditional widescreen aspect ratio, which is really jarring at first, but it does make this look a little bit less cheap. It does make it look a little bit more dynamic. However, as the film went on, it very much felt like they were just trying to mask the fact that this still is basically the same in terms of costumes, in terms of sets. There's not a lot that's changed there. The werewolves especially look really bad. All of them look like they have like one like white streak in their hair, and it's not convincing at all. I was watching this as usual, like a bunch of friends on cast and things like that, and one of them brought up that like this may look good in a high school production, but in an actual like movie, like a professionally made movie, it's really cheap looking, and it really does not seem like they really put any thought into the budget whatsoever here, and that still continues to be an ongoing problem throughout this entire series. So that's always, I think, will always be an issue with these films, is that they just never seem to have any idea of what they want to do with it, like costume-wise and set-wise. But even effects-wise, it's really ugly to look at here. There are a lot more times where like Zed will turn into a full-on zombie, and almost every single time I was like dying of laughter because it's like laughable to look at, and there are many scenes that are like that here. So again, while they are getting better in terms of how they look, like aspect ratio wise, in terms of costumes and set design, like I said, not much has really changed there at all. None of these sets look real. Everything just looks too, when we're at Seabrook High, everything looks too bright. When we're at the zombies or the werewolves, like, section of things just look too dark, and it's just, the contrast just is not very good here, very much at all, and it just didn't really work. But I think, once again, the other biggest problem with this movie, besides the other things I already mentioned, once again, is the score here. I talked about in the first movie how I really didn't see why it had to be a musical, and here, not only do I still not understand why this is a musical franchise, I actually think it's the main thing that brings this entire film down, because for me, these songs are so disposable and so whatever, to the point where they almost all feel the same. None of them feel like they stand out. They all have, like, similar choreography. They all have similar sounds to them. They're just, they don't really do a good job of making any of these musical numbers stand out. There isn't one that I can point to and be like, yeah, that's a highlight. Yeah, that's one I really like. And at least in the Descendants films, as bad as they were, they at least had that one song that sounded different from all the others. This film doesn't really have that, and I think that really does bring it down for me, because all of them are just really cheap and just pandering to kids. Like, they don't do a good job with the music here, but I also feel like it causes the movie to feel very underwritten. And I feel like if the music wasn't here, this story wouldn't be as rushed as it was. This story would not feel as messy as it was, because we would just have a lot more time to dive into things. And the music really seems to be their only focus here. There are scenes where quite literally we'll just jump from one song to another. And I know that's typically how musicals go, but because this film really does not have any business being a musical, that really does sour a lot of it. That really does make a lot of it feel just very underwritten, and I still just continue to think that the only reason this franchise is a musical is because of the fact that they do not think that it would sell as well and that people would care about as much if it wasn't. And considering Descendants just ended, they need another franchise, and it already seems like they're very much milking this for sure. So yeah, that's definitely a big problem for me. And like I said, the editing is also really bad here. The movie is way shorter than it needs to be. It's only 84 minutes, and I really have no idea why. I don't understand why this movie is so ridiculously short. I feel like they could have at least added another, like, 30 minutes to it. There's really no reason for it to be as short as it is, and, if anything, I think how, you know, the Descendants movies were, like, overly long and I had no idea why they were, like, almost 2 hours. I actually think that would benefit this film, because there's so much that goes down that you almost needed, like, 2 hours to make this feel even the least bit fluid, because it really comes across as very disjointed in that way, and a lot of that is due to the editing. And the way this movie ends as well is truly awful. There's a setup for Zombies 3, and if they're doing what I think they're actually doing, it's just really fucking stupid. And I can't believe they're actually going in the direction that they are. Guys, Zombies 2 is just such a unnecessary sequel. It carries over so many themes from the first movie that it almost feels like it has no reason to exist whatsoever. It has zero idea what to do with really any of its characters. Meg Donelly is still a standout, and Trevor Tordjman still did make me laugh. The aspect ratio is definitely better. It definitely looks more cinematic, but overall, it does not take away from just how cheap, how underwritten, and just how voiceless this entire film really does feel. It really feels like they had no idea what they really wanted to do with this overall, and aside from the characters of Zed and Addison, the film clearly does not care about any of these characters either. It's painfully obvious. It's forced, like, social agenda that just never comes across as genuine to me. There's just so many things that really do bring this film down. So I'm definitely going to give Zombies 2 overall a D. But over, guys, in my review of Zombies 2, let me know what you guys saw of this movie overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.